In this video, we'll build a responsive HTML email template using tables. Okay guys, so before we check out the index.html and image files that are in the video description that I'm going to provide you with for the tutorial, let's check out the responsive HTML email template design here in Gmail. So at the top of the template, we have the logo with the blue background section, followed by a banner image where it says company newsletter. And then underneath that, we'll have a 3-column section, and then the connect with us section with the social media icons, which will link to your social media pages, and then this footer section with the email, phone, and unsubscribe links. So a pretty good rule of thumb when you're testing for whether or not an email template is responsive is to just check it in the Gmail window. So if you flex the window down and you see that the different sections reshape and resize in Gmail, then that's a pretty good indication that it's going to be responsive for you on mobile devices, including the Gmail app. And just to show you that it's responsive on mobile apps, I'll show you on my iPhone just the Apple Mail app in dark mode here. With landscape, it's going to be the full width version with all 3 columns in line. As I scroll down here, you'll see. And the email template is centered, and we're gonna go over how to center it later in the video. And then in the portrait mode, you'll see that all of the 3 columns have their own single column width, and the images are slightly larger when they're down to just a single column. Now let's take a look at how the email template will look in Google Chrome, so we can resize the window from the full width down to the single column width using an extension for responsive layout. So I'm just going to pull up the mobile version of it. And the first thing that you'll notice is the company newsletter banner image in the background is actually going to be an image. We're not going to place the text on top of the banner image, because to actually place text on top of banner images and have the HTML email be compatible across email clients would take a large portion of this video to do it properly when it comes to adding conditional statements and the inline HTML and CSS that would be required for email compatibility. And we'll cover a little bit more when it comes to compatibility later, but for now, let's take a look at the different widths. So before it goes down to the single column width, you're going to see it have 2 columns and then a single column underneath where the image is slightly larger than the first 2 images. And then once we get down to the single column width, all of the images will increase in size a little bit to take up more space on the mobile devices. So in order to get started with the tutorial, in the description of this video will be a download that you see right here once you unzip the files, where we'll have an index.html document, which I have open in my text editor, and then an image folder including all of the images, including the social icons, which we'll be using to build the email template. You'll also see this file right here, which will link you to a bundle of email templates that I've recently developed. And all of the email templates included in the bundle have been tested across 90 different email clients. So if you check out that page, you'll see the email client tests as well as a preview of all of the bundles. I'm also considering building an advanced HTML email template course that would include conditional statements so the email template works across clients such as Microsoft Outlook. So if you think you'll be interested in the advanced HTML email template course, I'll put a link to a sign-up form so you can get notified in case I build it in the video comments. So as for the download in the video description, the index.html file that you see here, I'm going to open up in my text editor, and I'm going to be using the free program called Visual Studio Code, which is what you see in the background. So if you're not familiar with Visual Studio Code, this is probably the best free available text editor that you can get. And I'm going to be using a couple of shortcuts throughout the video. And if you want to learn about these shortcuts, you can check out the Visual Studio Code text editor lesson that I have on the resources page at w3newbie.com. And here, if you scroll down the page, you'll get links to Visual Studio Code, and you'll also see the 2 extensions that I use, which is Live Server, and then the Eagle Organic Next is the color styling that I use, as well as my complete settings, which you'll learn about how to add in the video at w3newbie.com/resources. Also, I'll mention that late in this video, we'll be testing the HTML email that we build by sending it to our own email address, and we'll be using a CSS inliner tool in addition to the free email test at putsmail.com. Okay, so now that we're all set up, let's go over to our text editor And with the live server extension that I mentioned on the resources page on my website, we'll be using the live server. So you just want to hit go live, and then it's going to open up your web browser. In this case, I'm using Google Chrome, as I mentioned before. And just to test that it's working, we can add some testing text here inside of a heading 1 tag. And then if I save it, you'll see that it's going to show up in the browser automatically there. So I'm going to do away with this text. And let's start up at the top of the index.html document, which is in the video description, starting with the doc type at the very top of the document. So the document type here, XHTML, may seem ancient to web developers, but with HTML email, this is still one of the more widely used doc types for email client compatibility, but you may see people use HTML4 as well, depending on where they want their emails sent to, or who their target email recipient is. And then, of course, for the HTML tag, we'll include the XHTML link or URL. And then for the content type, we'll have our character set, which is the standard character set UTF-8. And then for compatibility, we'll include Microsoft Edge and Internet Explorer. And then for viewport with device with initial scale 1, that's for mobile devices and compatibility. And then we'll have the title of our HTML email template, which you don't really need when you're sending emails, but if you want to send somebody to a live version, you might want the title up here in the web browser tab for bookmarking and other purposes if you want to send somebody to a live version of your email template. And then beneath that, we have some internal CSS added for us here already, in addition to the media queries started for the different device widths. And as I mentioned later in the video, we're going to make it so this internal style is made inline to go inside of the actual HTML tags. So our 2 breakpoints, as you see here, are going to be at the 600 pixel mark and then the 400 pixel mark, where the 2 columns go to a single column width. And the CSS that you're seeing here is just a few basic reset styles to do away with any inherent styling that an email client wants to put on our email template design. So now let's drop down to the body section of the document. And the first thing that we're going to work on is centering the email template on the page. So we're going to need to add a couple of different classes to do that. So let's start off with the center tag, which is still used in HTML email because we're using the old document type. And then we'll add a class called wrapper. And then inside of that, we're just going to add a div class. And we're going to call this div class WebKit. Then inside of these 2 classes, we'll add our actual table, which will be our main table holding the table rows for our email template. So we're just going to say table class outer, and we're going to give this an alignment of center, which will help center the email client. So the WebKit and the outer classes here are going to have the actual 600 pixel width, and the wrapper class is just going to give us the background color around it that you're seeing with the gray, as well as help center it by giving it a width of 100% of the email client. Now let's add a little CSS. So the body tag, we're going to apply a background color to this, but it might not matter actually in an email client because that page is already going to have body style, but we'll just add background color F6, F9, FC, which is a hex value that's going to give us a little bit of an off-white color and a really light gray. So if I save it, it might be hard to see the difference here, but if I add the color black with all zeros, you'll see the change there. And then I'll just put it back to the light gray shade. So we're going to add this background color to the wrapper as well, which is what will actually be seen inside of the email client. Since, as I mentioned, the email client will have its own body style already added to it. So let's add the wrapper class here. And we're going to give this a width of 100% to make sure that the wrapper takes up the full width of the email client and gives us that gray or light gray background color along with some other style that we're going to add here. So we'll add width 100%, and then we're going to add table layout fixed. And this is sort of a tricky style declaration to understand, but basically we want to make it so the wrapper won't be any wider than the table that's set inside of it. So for example, when we flex the window down. And then let's add the same background color that we gave to the body, which is the hex value F6, F9, FC that we see right here. And then one other thing that I'd like to do is add some padding to the bottom of it. So I always like it when there's a little bit of space in the email client underneath the actual email template. So I'm just going to add padding bottom and then 40 pixels. So now what we can do is drop down and style the next class that was inside of our HTML, which is the WebKit class. And we're going to set the actual width of the email template with this class. So we're going to say WebKit for the class, and then we're going to give it a max width of 600 pixels, and that's going to be the full width of the template. And once we set the max width to 600 pixels, we're going to give this a background color of white. So that's just going to be the hex value FFF. But for compatibility, you might as well just make sure that you do all 6 digits in the hex value. So now if we go back to the browser, we're not going to see anything yet, but if we start to add some content, we'll start to get the shape of our email template. So if I just write testing, there you'll see the white outline of the email template width. And then the last thing that we'll style before we add our first table row to the table is let's style the actual outer class that we gave our table. So we're going to add some reinforcement to the centering of the email template and the width. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add margin 0 auto. So with HTML email, it's always good practice to have a capital M with margin for Outlook compatibility, even though we're not developing for Outlook here, because we're not going to include conditional statements. So margin 0 auto centers elements with CSS, and then we're also going to add a width to it. So we're going to give this a width of 100%. And that'll be 100% of its parent element, WebKit. And then we're going to give it a max width of 600 pixels. And then we're going to also add border spacing 0, which we'll add a few times throughout the design, which does away with any inherent border spacing that email clients want to add to tables. And then let's also set a font family for our text. So we're just going to use the font family sans serif, which gives us kind of a nice rounded font. And then the color of this font, we're going to change. We're going to make it sort of a dark gray instead of a black font. So we're going to choose the hex value 4A, 4A, 4A. So hashtag 4A, 4A, 4A. And if you want to change the color, this is a pretty good hex value to base off of for fonts. So if I just take a look at the colors surrounding it, you'll see a little bit lighter and a little bit darker. So 3D, 3D, 3D is pretty popular, and then 4A, 4A, 4A for font colors. All right, so now we're all set up to get started with our actual content inside of the table. So I'm going to delete this heading 1 text, and what we're going to do is each section will be comprised of a table row. So this section up top with the blue background will be our first table row that we'll add. So I'm going to add tr, and then inside of our table row, we'll have our table data tag, and then inside of that, we'll have our table. And then once you add table, just hit enter, and the emit feature here in Visual Studio Code, which you can learn about on the resources page on my website, will lay out the HTML tags for us here. So what we'll need to do, because we want to add styling to inside of the table in the form of padding around the logo, is we'll need to add a new set of table row and table data tags inside of this table that's already inside of a set of table row and table data tags. But first, we'll need to give our table a width of 100%, and we'll also add the style border spacing 0, which I mentioned previously. This way it takes up the full width of the parent elements, and we'll see the background color that will give it take up the full table row. So let's add a new table row, and inside of that we'll have our table data tag, and then we're going to wrap our image with a link. So we'll add a, and then inside of that we'll have our image, and the anchor tag, which is the ahref tag. If you're unfamiliar with HTML, is the link tag, and then the img tag is of course for images. So let's add some style to the table data tag here, which will be the actual style for the background color as well as the padding, and then we'll align the logo. Since it's wrapped in a link, we can use text align center to center our logo image. So that's going to be inside of the inner table data tag here. So we'll add style, and then background color, and the hex value for that blue shade is 388CDA. And before we add the image and the rest of our styling, just so we can see something show up here, I'll just add a paragraph tag and add some text inside of this. And there we have our test text. And now let's finish off our styling. So we're going to add some padding all around of 10 pixels. And then we'll also add text align center. And as you can see, I'm not using any spaces here inside of the internal CSS, which is recommended for HTML email. And there we have our centered test text, which we can replace with the logo. So let's add the logo image from the image files. So that's going to be inside of the img folder, and it's going to be the w3newbie.png file. So I'll add img / which is inside of the image folder, and then the w3newbie.png logo. So once again, img, and then w3newbie, and then save it. And whoops, that's the blue one. So it's going to be -white. And there we go. And then what we'll need to do is we'll want to resize the logo. So you can kind of tell, or you may not be able to, that it's going to be centered for us already, but we'll really see it once we add a width to it. So we're going to add a width of 180, which is 180 pixels. And I'll just delete this paragraph text. And there we have our centered logo. So now if we toggle back and forth, you're not going to be able to tell the difference, at least down until that point. And then what we can do also is just add a link here that will wrap around the image. So the purpose of emails or email marketing campaigns is just to get people to click to your website. So I like to wrap pretty much all images with links. And then if you want, you can add alternative text and title text. So when you hover over it, you'll see the logo text appear right there with the title text. And the alternative text is, of course, for if there's a problem with the image loading, you'll see the logo alt text instead. So now let's drop down to the next table row tag, which will be for the banner image. So since this image doesn't require any styling other than displaying the image, which will take up the full width of the table at 600 pixels, we can just add a simple table row, table data, and the actual image tag inside of it. We don't need to double layer the table and table row, table data tags. So let's add table row, table data, and then inside of that we'll have our anchor text tag, the link, and then the image. So for the link here, if you want, you can type out your website link, or you can just add a hashtag to leave the link blank for now. So I'll just type out my website address. And then for the image, this is going to be img /, and this is going to be the 1200 by 700 image. And then you can add the alternative text if you want. So now if we save it and refresh, we'll see that the image is actually taking up its full height and width. So we'll need to set a width here of 600 pixels. So width 600, and now we have it set to the rest of the email template width. So now let's drop down to the 3-column layout, which is going to be the responsive section of the email template. So we're going to start this off like we would any other table row with tr, td, and then table, since we're going to have content inside of this. And then I'll hit enter. And we're going to give this table its width of 100%. So width 100%, and then we'll also add the border spacing 0 to our table with the style. And then inside of this, similar to the first section that we added right here, we're going to have a table row and table data tags inside of that. And we're going to set a table data tag, which will nest all 3 columns inside of it, and then we'll need to add a new table inside of that for each column. So we're going to add trtd, and we're going to give this a class called 3columns. And once we have the table data tag set for our 3columns class, which will wrap around each of the 3 individual columns, we'll need to add a table for the first column. So that's going to include the Apple Watch image, the text, and the link underneath it. So we'll add a new table, and we're going to give this table a class that we'll call column. And then inside of that, we'll have a new table row tag with the table data tag that follows it that we're going to give a class that we'll call padding. And this is going to be padding to add around the image and the rest of our content so the columns aren't too close to one another at the full width. And then inside of that, we'll have an additional table that will have our actual content inside of it. So this is going to be the content that sort of starts at the edge of the image and includes the Apple Watch, the text, and the link. So we're going to add table, and we're going to give this a class called content. And then inside of that, we'll have a table row and a table data tag, and then a link that will wrap around our image, which will be the first bit of our content. So I'm just going to clean this up by making the link on a new line here. And for the link in this case, I'll just add a hashtag to leave it blank for now. And the image for the Apple Watch is going to be in the IMG folder, and then 380 by 280, and it's going to be the one without any numbers next to it. So it'll be that last one. So when we refresh, there we have our image, but it's displaying at its full size, of course, so we'll need to add a width to it. And we're going to give this a width of 150 pixels. So I'll just write width 150. And then we're also going to apply a max width in the CSS. So we'll add style max width 150 pixels. And there we have it, but it's pushed all the way off to the left because we haven't added the padding styling that goes around it just yet. So let's start styling these classes that we've laid out, the 3 columns, column, padding, and the content classes. So I'm going to go back up towards the CSS styling section here, and I'm going to add the 3 columns class, and we're going to add text align center because all of our text here inside of the columns will be align centered. And while we're not designing for Outlook, I'm going to share a little snippet with you here. If you were designing for Outlook, you'd want to add font size 0 and line height 0, even to elements where there isn't any font or characters inside of it. So we would add font size 0 and line height 0. I'll just add font size 0 for now, but it's not really going to make a difference since we're not styling for Outlook. Then next we'll add some padding to the top of our 3 column section. So I'm just going to add padding top 40 pixels. And we'll also add some padding to the bottom, and we'll use a little bit less padding with padding bottom 30 pixels. So now if we go back to Google Chrome and refresh, we'll start to see the padding applied on the top and bottom. So before we add the padding all around, we're going to need to specify the width of the column. So if you remember, we added that column class, which is inside of the 3 column class. And we're going to have a column for each one of the 3 columns eventually. But for now, we're just going to reference that column class inside of the 3 columns class. And we're going to give this a width of 100% and then a max width of 200 pixels. So if you remember, we gave the image width a width of 150 pixels. So once we get down to the small screen at 400 pixels, we'll make it so the image takes up all 200 pixels. But before we get ahead of ourselves, now we're going to add the actual style that makes it so we can align tables. So this is the trick in making the tables responsive in our email clients and making them center on the page. So we're going to use a style that's called display inline-block. And this is going to make the tables align next to one another. And then we're going to use vertical align top. And this will also, in combination with display inline block, make them align next to one another. So without those 2 style declarations, the columns will just be stacked on top of one another in email clients. So next, let's add some style to the padding class that we added to the table data tag, which will wrap around the content inside of the column. So we'll add padding. And we're going to give this a padding all around of 15 pixels. So now if we go back it's going to be hard to see, but if we did away with the display inline block and vertical align top styles, we should be able to see the padding applied. Also in HTML email, you never want to apply padding all around like this, or at least for Outlook, you would want to add padding top, padding bottom, and so on, 15 pixels. All right, so now let's move on to styling the content class that we have inside of the padding class right here. So we're going to reference the wrapper parent, which is the 3 columns class, and then the content class afterwards. And we're going to add the font size that we have for our paragraph text here, and then we'll style the Apple Watch text separately. So we'll give this a font size of 15 pixels, and then we're going to give it a line height of 20 pixels to space out the text a little bit. So now we're ready to drop down and add the next table row inside of our content table beneath the row for our watch image. So we're going to be adding this content that we see right here. So I'm going to drop down underneath that closing table row tag right here, and we'll add a new table row, and inside of that we'll have our table data tag. And before we add our text content, let's add some padding to this table data tag to separate it from the image tag that sits above the text. So we'll add style padding 10 pixels all around. And that's going to make it so that the paragraph text isn't quite as wide as the image width also. So for the Apple Watch text, let's add a paragraph tag. And then we'll just write Apple Watch, and I'll do it in uppercase characters so we don't have to add the CSS for that. And then underneath that, I'm just going to copy the paragraph text and paste that in between the paragraph tags. And then underneath that, we'll have a link where it says learn more ... So I'll just write learn more ... And now we'll go about adding some styling, because as we can see, the Apple Watch text we'll want to make bold and a little bit larger, and then we'll style the link. So we're going to say font size 17 pixels, and then font weight bold for the capital text. And then for the links, what we're going to do is, since we're going to have several links, we'll just style it up here, and then it'll apply to all the links with our inline styling towards the end of the tutorial. So we'll add text decoration none to do away with the underline, and then the color for the links, we'll just make the same color as the blue shade at the top of the email with the background color. And then let's also make the learn more link text as well as the other links slightly larger at 16 pixels in font size than the regular paragraph text, which is going to be 15 pixels, I think is what we made it. All right, so now that we have the first column all set, instead of typing out all this information for the full table for the column, what we can do is just copy this, because it's going to be essentially the same HTML. Just make sure you get all the way up to the column class for that table, and then we can paste it in twice underneath and change the content for that accordingly to match the image as well as the text. So now if we go and check it, we'll see that, okay, the width of the image, of the banner image, I missed something there. So we'll correct that in just a minute to get the responsive effect. But first, let's just change the text for the watch bands here for the third column, as well as the image URL. So that's just going to be -3 after the 380 by 280. And then for the middle one, we're going to change this text to say earpods instead of Apple Watch in all caps. And then we'll just change this image to be -2. And then if we go and take a look at it, now it's going to look like the original at the full width, except for this image. What we're going to need to do is set a max width for it. So we're just going to add style and then max width 100%. So it flexes with the window width. So now if we save it and refresh, you'll see that we'll start to have our responsive columns go into effect. So now that we're all set with our 3-column layout, let's drop down and start to style, or add the HTML to rather, the contact us section, and then we'll get to the footer section. So we'll add trtd table, and then inside of that, we'll have an additional table row and table data tag. So before we start adding our style for the inner table data tag, let's add the width 100% and style border spacing 0 to our table. And I suppose we could have just added border spacing 0 inline to each table, but we don't need it on every table tag here, so that's all right. And then for our inner table data tag, we're going to add that blue background shade, which is the 388 CDA hex value, and then we'll add a padding of 15 pixels all around and text align center, because the social icons will be wrapped in links, so the text align center styling will take care of centering those images. So first, let's add the connect with us text inside of a paragraph tag, and this paragraph styling is going to be different from any other paragraph styling, so we'll just add it all internally here with font size 18 pixels, and then we'll give it a color of white with the hex value FFF. Then to separate the text from the icons beneath it, let's add margin bottom 13 pixels. And this is sort of arbitrary, but I think it looks pretty good with that spacing. And then of course we can add the connect with us text inside of the paragraph opening and closing tags. So there we have our connect with us text all centered and displaying how we want. So let's add the social media icons from the image folder. So as I said, each icon image will be inside of a link. So we'll start with the anchor text tag with A and then img for the image tag. And I'm just going to leave the link blank. And for the image source, we'll have the image folder, and then I'm just going to add the Facebook one here since that's the first. And we'll need to resize it, as you can see here. So we're going to give this a width of 30 pixels. And then what we can do to save some time is these are all going to have the same basic HTML that we see here, except for the actual image URL. So I'm just going to paste this in here 4 times. And then we can change the white Facebook image URL to Twitter. And it's adding the .png again, so make sure you delete that. And then YouTube and LinkedIn, and then the last one is Instagram. And then if we save it and go back and take a look, there we have our social media icons laid out, which you can add your links to. And you don't have to do this, but if you are creating new icons, adding a little bit of space around them will make it a lot better and easier to style them, especially in email clients when they want to push all the images right next to one another. Okay, so now let's drop down to the last section, which is sort of the footer of the email here with the logo and the text underneath. So let's start a new table row, and then inside of that we'll have our table data tag and our table tag. And in this case, we're going to add a background color to the first table data tag because we don't need to add any padding to this. We can do this on the outer one, and we're going to give this a color of EF, 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 which is sort of that light gray shade, a little bit darker than the actual wrapper background color. And then we'll add table width 100% and style border spacing 0. Then inside of that, we can add our new layer of table row and table data. So we'll add TRTD. And we're going to add some padding to our inner table data tag. So we'll add padding all around of 20 pixels. So padding 20 pixels, and then we'll want our text aligned centered in here. So text align center. Then inside of our table data tag, we'll be able to add the logo wrapped with a link once again, and the text align center class will take care of, or style rather, will take care of centering our image. So let's add the link followed by the image tag. So img, and I'll just leave this blank, and then img/w3newbie.png. And then we're going to give our image a width of 160 pixels. So width 160. And now if we go back, there we have our logo displaying towards the bottom. And now we can move down to the text that sits underneath that. So we'll just use a regular paragraph tag for this. And we're going to give this a style to increase the font size of 16 pixels. And then we'll add some margin on the top to separate it from the logo with margin top 18 pixels. And the text for this says W3Newbie HTML email. And the text underneath this is going to be similar. So you can copy and paste it or type it out. I'll just paste it underneath and then change the text to the street address with 123 Street Road, City, State. And then what we'll do is we're going to change the margin around slightly. So we're going to add margin bottom 10 pixels on here. And then the margin top for the street address, we're going to change that to a margin bottom 10 pixels as well, instead of having the margin top. And then let's drop down and add the link for the email address. So we're going to have this inside of a paragraph tag, and then the link for the email address, if you can see in the bottom left corner, we're going to add a mail to link. So when somebody clicks on the email address, it's going to prompt their email client on their desktop computer or their mobile device to send an email to that address. So I'll just write email@example.com. And then we're going to do something similar with the phone number. So we're going to add a tell link for the phone number. So once again, we'll write P and then the anchor text and tell : then the phone number, and make sure there's no dashes here. And then when somebody clicks on this, even if they're on their desktop computer, it's going to prompt them, if they have a feature for it at least, to make a phone call. And then we have the text, of course. And then lastly, what we'll do is we're going to add that unsubscribe link underneath this table row right here. So I'm just going to paste this and then do away with everything but the last link. And then I'll do away with the telephone number link, and then change this to unsubscribe in all caps. And then we're going to give this a style of font size 13 pixels to reduce the size of the text. And then let's adjust the padding here to be padding bottom 20 pixels instead of, or 25 pixels instead of padding all around. And let's take a look at it. And it looks like the unsubscribe text is a little further down than I'd hoped. One thing that I had down previously is to add a line center here. I'm not sure why I had that, but I'm going to add that anyways. Maybe it was because this is a top layer table data tag with the padding applied to it. But anyways, what I'm going to do is reduce the padding from 20 pixels, at least on the bottom, to 10 pixels in the table data tag above. So we can keep padding 20 pixels, and I'll add semicolon, which I missed, and then padding bottom 10 pixels. And then that will reduce the space above the unsubscribe text. So that looks pretty good until we get down to the bottom and we're missing the little blue line there. So let's add a table row and then a table data tag inside of that. And we're just going to give this a height of 20 pixels. And we don't have any content or padding needed inside of that. So we'll just add background color 388 CDA. All right, so now if we go and refresh, that does it for all of the full width styling of the responsive HTML email template. So now what we'll do is we'll add those few media query styles to transform the size of the image or the images inside of our columns as we flex down the window. So here I'm just going to open it inside of the smaller window so we can take a look at the image size. And as you can see, they're all going to be that same 150 pixel width, no matter how wide or narrow the screen is. But on the finished version, as you can see, we're going to have the images slightly larger, so they take up more space on mobile devices at 200 pixels in width. So when the template first drops underneath 600 pixels, we're going to have the third image at that 200 pixel width mark. And then when the template drops down underneath 400 pixels in width, when they're all a single column, we're going to add the 200 pixel width to the first two images. So we're going to add an image, and then we're going to reference that class. It's going to be harder to see with the different colors here, but that's going to be, oh, we didn't add the class. So we're going to add a class called third image dash last, or third dash image dash last here for the last of the 3 column images. So basically what we're going to say is at screen widths underneath 600 pixels, we want the third image last to have a width of 200 pixels. And then we're going to give it a max width of 200 pixels as well. So by just adding this style, it would need to override the internal styling that we gave it for the width. So if we save, we're not going to see the effect until we add important, so exclamation point important at the end of the width and max width style declarations. So that's going to override the 150 pixel width. So as you can see, now the third image is going to keep that width, but it's going to be off-centered because of the padding class. So we'll take care of that in just a moment. But first, let's add a class for the first 2 images. So we're just going to add a class that we'll just call third dash image to make it easy on us. And then all we'll need to do is get rid of the dash last to apply the same styling to it. So I'll just copy this class and add it to the image for the second column as well. And then if we go back up, we can just copy the CSS right here and add that to the style for under 400 pixels in width. So this is going to make the images 200 pixels, but if you look closely, they're not going to be centered on the page. If we go up to the full width, they're still going to be centered. But once we get down to the width where the 200 pixel image width is applied, the padding that we added is going to mess up our spacing, so they're going to be off-centered. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add padding right and padding left 0 here. So we'll still have the padding on the top and bottom. And we're going to need to make it important to override the original padding styling. And then I'll just change this to left. And then if we take a look at it on the smaller screen widths, now they're going to be centered on the page. So you won't be able to tell until they're at the 200 pixel width, but now the padding isn't going to be pushing them off to the right. Okay, so that concludes all of the HTML and CSS styling for the completed HTML email template. So what we're going to do is copy all this HTML and CSS. So I'm going to do select all and copy. And then we're going to go over to putsmail.com and check out their inliner tool. And what you can do is all of this style that we added internally, if we hit inline our CSS, we're going to have it all in line here. And this is ideally the HTML and CSS that you'd want to use when you're sending your email. So all of the CSS that we added is now in line with the HTML. And don't do the next step on your own yet, but I'm going to show you what to do from here. So here at Putsmail, we're going to go over to their new test link, and then you're going to add your email address where it says where we want to send your email to, and then add a simple subject line. So I'll just add test email for new template, and then I'll paste the HTML and CSS here, and we can add move inline or move CSS inline if you're using the version before it's inlined. And then once it's sent, I'm going to show you the issue. So here is the problem. We use local images. So unless your images are uploaded to the internet, you're not going to be able to see them displaying inside of the email. So there are a few resources for how you can upload your images to the internet. So one resource that would cost you a little bit, but might be worth it to you, is to get your own website server space. So similar to uploading your website to the internet, you can just upload your images to the internet, even if you don't have a website. And it's going to cost you, but you can access your images that way to link to your email templates. Or you can use a free program like imgbb.com to upload your images where you can get direct links to them for free. Or you can use your email marketing service. So for example, MailChimp, where you can get direct links to your images to add to your email template designs. So just to show you, I've uploaded my images to the internet and added them to the template. And here we have them after sending a test email with the Litmus puts mail testing feature. And that concludes the responsive HTML email template design. I want to thank you for sticking around with me. Please remember to like this video, subscribe, and check out my 9 responsive HTML email bundle, as well as, if I end up making one, my email course, which I would put in the description of the video.